As lead-in, let me mention that I was talking to the young guys today. We were talking about James chapter 3. Let me share that with you. And we'll be getting this on Thursday evening, of course. James chapter 3, it starts off, "My brethren, be not many masters, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation." Okay, now, in this, and we'll repeat it on a Thursday night, repeat everything here. Be not many masters. He's not telling people, oh, you shouldn't aspire to being an authority. You shouldn't aspire to leadership. And that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is don't be flip about it. Don't be just wantonly saying, well, I'm going to be a leader and put me at the head. Look at me, look at me, look at me. What he's talking about is how that we shouldn't be flippant about it, because the warning is when you are a master in authority or an expert on something, that brings you into more accountability. The more you know, the greater God's expectation of you. To whom much is given, of him much is required. This is not a warning that you shouldn't try to know things. It just means, yes, you should know things, but also along with knowledge goes accountability. And so you look at somebody like King David, and he goes to have a census of the people, and God is going to judge him. And so what does he do? He sends a plague on Israel. Okay, was David the only sinner in Israel at the time? No, it's just that he, as the king, is responsible for more judgment. So somebody who wants to become a leader politically or whatever, you've got to know that you're going to affect other people. Your decisions are going to affect other people. And so this led into a conversation about being very serious about our Christianity, and to take it seriously, and to extend ourselves that way. And so the point that we went to make in Sunday school was that in the course of things being very serious, we want to remember that little things matter. There are sometimes Christians in churches, and I believe this is true of evangelical churches as opposed to fundamentalist churches. Fundamentalist churches are considered to be very separatist. That means we believe in separation from worldliness, and you just don't take things lightly. You don't go out to the bar with your friends and have a soda, okay? Because the next thing you know, that little indiscretion, it doesn't matter, it's okay, I'm a Christian. No, you put yourself in the path of sin, in the fellowship of sin, and you start compromising yourself. And churches can be very filled with compromise because we don't take things seriously. Now, we don't want to become obsessive about things. We don't want to become pharisaical about things, but we do want to take things seriously. I see this in the case when one of the things that, it's like a couple of things that are like the canaries in the coal mine that lead to problems. And it's one of the issues is they switch from the use of the King James Version. And they say, oh, it doesn't matter what version we use, until you start to point out the problem of the versions, the modern versions, which we're going to get into in our discussion of the King James Version in a couple of weeks or so. And so what happens is when they don't take that seriously, and they start accommodating the errors in these modern versions, the next thing you know, you've got doctrinal errors that a church compromises with. Then another thing that happens is a changeover in music. I mentioned this, and Emmanuel so nicely pointed out that how that with rock and roll music, he says it's satanic. I said, there you go, that's it right there. There's a reason why we don't use music that has a rock and roll derived beat. Not all beats are exactly rock and roll, but they're going to be derived from that. And so we don't do a lot of modern music, and we watch what musical artists that we will promote or endorse. Okay, because when the music goes and the worldliness creeps in that way, and then the Bible versions don't matter, and they start making compromises, little errors here, little errors there. It starts to build up, then collectively, the full force of that. You've got a compromised church. It becomes a very worldly church. And then, and what doesn't seem like a problem at first, when the seeds of compromise are sown, you'll see it much later on when those seeds start to bear fruit. And I pointed out how that people go from things like drinking, it doesn't matter if I have a glass of wine, or it doesn't matter if I have a beer, to the point where all the way, and I can give you the steps, but all the way to the time when the pastor is inviting the men for a men's fellowship so they can learn how to make beer. And that is, it's a real case. That pastor is no longer, I think, pastor of that church any longer either. So it's the effect of the compromises as you go along. So when we speak adamantly about things and forcefully, it's because it's because we have taken the time to master our subject and to be masters of the subject so that we can present forceful arguments behind things. So the compromise takes place. So we want to realize that that's one of the reasons why we are especially looking at church history, to see that history of compromise. Okay, second question here. We were just talking about this. I was trying to make sure we got to the right place here, and we had King Henry on the 8th, and Diana said, it doesn't look like Henry VIII, because Henry VIII was a little bit more rotund. Okay, so, but then, who's this guy as Thomas More? Thomas More is a real key figure in that period of history. We're not going to look at Thomas More himself, okay, but he was a key figure in that action. If you would like to see a movie that gets it pretty much right, you can look up A Man for All Seasons, and that's about Thomas More. Thomas More was an advisor. He was not an official counselor to Henry VIII, but we're going to see in his response, as a scholar and as a lawyer, he's giving advice to Henry. And he is a Catholic, and he's trying to defend the Catholic Church in his life. He ends up making trouble for the Protestants. However, what is depicted about his life is that he did it with integrity, and that's what's interesting about that piece of history. He did it with integrity. He was true to his values, and he was not into compromise. Unfortunately, he should have changed his values to be more Protestant, but he ends up getting killed because of that. So as you listen to Thomas More, he is a key figure. One of the things that Thomas More is known for was a book on that was labeled Utopia, and in another vein, when we get to the American history aspect, and we look at the philosophies that they were fighting, it's always all through history what we see is central government versus the government of the people. Thomas More, in his writing on Utopia, pointed out that in order to have utopia, a perfect society, it's going to require central control of people's lives. And this goes along with Thomas Hobbes, who wrote a book on utopia called Leviathan. Leviathan was an animal in the Bible that was like a sea monster. And so the Leviathan of government is going to be needed if you want to have utopia. It's going to go along with Plato and his book on the Republic, which goes to also show if you want to have utopia, a perfectly ordered society, you're going to have a central government that's going to command everything. If this sounds like communism, it is, okay, because it's a principle that goes throughout everything. And so And so this unified perception of what it takes to have utopia, um, where you want to vote for the people who know best for you and you don't make decisions yourself, um, that problem is throughout, and that is Thomas More. That's one of the things that he was especially noted for. Okay, so we're looking at history, but now we're going to go back. We're going to finish up William Tyndale and his work on providing the Bible for people, and we're going to pick it up from there. Any questions before we continue? Any questions on anything? Yes?
Evangelical church.
Okay, a fundamentalist versus an evangelical church. In the 1920s, and we will be getting to this, by the way, for sure. This is going to be something we'll cover more in depth. But in the 1920s, by that time, after you had all the uproar over evolution, and which was it was very bad science. They didn't know anything about DNA. There's so much they didn't know, and evolution, Darwinian evolution, was built on, well, it looks this way, and we might surmise this, and I'm guessing that. Well, theologians, preachers weren't quite knowing how to handle it. They didn't want to look unscientific. So what they did was they started trying to interpret the Bible in a way that would accommodate this new science. In order to do it, they ended up denying the miraculous and trying to find explanations for everything. So it got to be the point where the modernists, there was these modernists that were denying the Bible, denying the miraculous, were leading in so many churches and seminaries and things that there was an uproar by those who were Bible believers, and they were in a number of denominations having a problem with this. So they started saying, what is absolutely necessary to be able to say that you're a Christian or that you're a Christian church? And they said, what are the fundamentals that we're going to look for? And some of them were to talk about the virgin birth of Christ, because the virgin birth of Christ led into the teaching on the deity of Christ. They said, the Bible is the Word of God, inerrant and in its entirety. And that was opposed to what the modernists were saying. They were denying different aspects of the Bible and its historicity or whatever, trying to find rational explanations. And there were a number of things. So the big deal was the attitude of fundamentalism, which was, we take the Bible at its word, it is our authority, and we have to believe these things. Now, they didn't say this about certain things because some of them were baptizing infants and others weren't. They said, well, the way you baptize doesn't really make you Christian. What makes you a Christian is if you ask Jesus Christ to be your Savior. So they were looking for the essential things. Well, the fundamentalists, they grew in power in their churches, and they were multiplying and things like that. But later on, I'm gonna think it's around the 1950s. There were some that said, "Well, you guys are you're too serious," is what they were saying, and they wanted to make allowances for things, and so they coined the phrase evangelical or neo-evangelical. And evangelicals, they have the same statements of faith that we do. Essentially, it's really all the same, except they're a little bit sloppy in the things that they allow for. We had with the kids on Friday night, I was talking about the sermon for this morning, because that's what I do. I prepare them for Sunday morning, and I put up a cross, and I said, okay, let's remember, what happened at the cross. And so I drew some grass around the bottom of the cross, and all around there were these colored eggs, and so I drew some eggs around the cross. In fact, you can see the drawings downstairs. And I drew a rabbit, and they said, well, it looks more like an aardvark. I said, yeah, that's my best rabbit. And I said, and the rabbits were running around and they were laying eggs. How they did that, I don't know. And the kids got the point. Okay, how did these things come in? And I showed the pagan origin behind the Easter eggs. So that churches, when they're out there having their Easter egg hunts, I'm thinking, great, you are worshiping Ishtar and Tammuz, and you're bringing these pagan practices because you're saying, oh, it doesn't matter. We can use this, and we can bring people in. No, not that way. Having Halloween parties. Halloween is literally a celebration of a satanic holiday. So when you think of evangelicals, they can be great in so many ways and love them and can talk with them and pray with them and hope they get lots of souls saved and everything like that. But when it comes to operating church, we say, let's get back to the fundamentals. Let's really hone in on those things that are important. And it turns out there's a lot of things that are important. So that's basically the difference. I will say an evangelical is like a sloppy fundamentalist. Okay, so there's your answer. And we will get to that a little bit more later on. Okay, very good. Anything else? Then let's get to our video. And, okay. Well, we're going to close with prayer in just a moment, and I want to point out that when we're using the Bible today, although Tyndale did not help in the translation of the King James Version, the King James translators, the one that James later on brought together, they used a bunch of Tyndale's work in order to give us this Bible that we're using today. And now you know something of the rest of the story. Okay, any questions that anybody has? Okay, well, very good. Anything? I can't remember. It looked like that.
I mean, is there record of it?
There's record of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll have to Google it later on. Okay.